our speaker. Obed Arango is a Mexican Latinx photographer, visual artist, journalist, and university professor. It's very nice that he's made the time to come and talk to us tonight. Thank you. He holds an MA in cultural anthropology, an MA in social policy, a BA in communication sciences. Obed is the founder and executive director of the Norristown-based Centro de Cultura, Arte, Trabajo y Educación, or CCATE, a non-profit organization he founded in 2011, whose mission is, and I quote, to ignite social change and social transformation, developing the talents and empowering the Latin communities through education, art, culture, technology, health, and science. Obed lectures in Penn School of Public Policy and Penn School of Social Policy and Practice on social policy and qualitative research methods. As a journalist, he has extensive experience covering national and international news, including presidential campaigns, dreamers, and immigration reform. In 2006, he created the radio program Villa Inmigrante, which was broadcast on Mexico's Radio Universidad de Guadalajara. In 2011 to 2013, he created the TV program Bandera, Tus Colores, Tu Comunidad, broadcast on Telemundo. And from 1994 to 2001, he conducted an ethnography of Mexico City's Central Square with a particular focus on the Zapatista movement. As a scholar, Obed has presented in numerous national and international forums and conferences related to immigration, education, human rights, human development, history of Mexico, symbolic anthropology, and ethnography. He has published in academic journals in the United States, United Kingdom, and Latin America on immigration, education, linguistic anthropology, human rights, and ethnography of the public space. As an artist, Obed has presented solo photographic exhibitions in prestigious galleries in the United States, as well as collective exhibitions, including at the Barnes Foundation of Philadelphia, University of the Arts, and National Latino Arts and Culture. He also directed and co-curated two major art exhibitions of CCATE, The Difficult Art of Migrating for the Annenberg Center of the Arts of the University of Pennsylvania and the Museum of the Americas of the Organization of American States. Among other awards, and I have abbreviated his very impressive bio, in 2021, the journal Generosity included him as #1 in the realist impact of 45 Philadelphia area leaders whose work make a difference. In 2018, Obed, as executive director, received the Otley Award representing CCATE, and that is the highest recognition that the Mexican government gives to Mexicans abroad. CCATE became the 10th organization worldwide in receiving this recognition. And closer to home, in 2015, Obed was named Education Champion of the Year at the Hispanic Choice Awards in Philadelphia. Obed strives in all his endeavors to generate social transformation that benefits the broader community, and he hopes that a new generation of young Latinxers will emerge as a positive presence and force for Montgomery County, Philadelphia City, United States, and Latin America. And it's both a pleasure and an honor to welcome him here today to speak on Zapata desde varios ángulos, or Emiliano Zapata from many angles. Obed.
Thank you. Muchas gracias. Good evening, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here tonight with all of you. And first, I would like to give some words in Spanish before I start the presentation in order to honor my community, the Latino community here in Philadelphia, but also the Mexican friends and colleagues in Mexico City and other parts of Mexico and Latin America that are connecting. Entonces quiero saludar a la comunidad latina, a la Villa Inmigrante de aquí de Filadelfia, de los Estados Unidos, especialmente a la comunidad de CCATE, a quienes envío un saludo, a los niños y a las niñas, a los padres y madres que en este momento se están conectando. Y también quiero enviar un saludo especial a los colegas, a los amigos, a la familia en México. Esta presentación se la quiero dedicar a mis padres, Jaime Arango y Haruko Ishihara. This presentation I want to dedicate it to my parents in Mexico, in Aguascalientes, Mexico, Jaime Arango and Haruko Ishihara. Thank you. And having said that, as an anthropologist, as a lecturer here at the University of Pennsylvania, as a Mexican and as an immigrant, it is an honor, it is a privilege to share with all of you today, here in this historical space of great relevance to the world of anthropology and archaeology, as is the Penn Museum. I thank the museum authorities for inviting me to share today about one of the greatest revolutionaries in history, Emiliano Zapata. Let's see. Is this working? Then let's do the old-fashioned. Okay, there you go. It represents an honor to talk about one of the two greatest revolutionaries of the people of Mexico, such as Emiliano Zapata Salazar and José Doroteo Arango Arámbula, also known as Pancho Villa. Both deeply admired by me, the latter for whom I have a special appreciation, not only in history, but in family. 11 years ago, and as a reason for the centenary of the Mexican Revolution, the Mexican consul of those days, Carlos Giralt, invited me to give a presentation related to General Doroteo Arango in the Academy of Natural Sciences on the occasion of the century of the Revolution. And in that occasion, I closed with the following words. For many, the idealism of Villa and Zapata represented the defeat of the people. For me, it was the real victory of the revolution, because they represented what is expected of every Mexican, public servant, social leader, and a politician, to love the people, to seek the well-being of each generation, to believe in tierra y libertad, land and freedom, to seek justice for the worker, to understand in depth the pain of the people, to confront the powerful and the oppressor, and not to settle for situations of injustice, and confront the powerful and the oppressor, and have an irrevocable vocation of service. Today, I therefore wish to continue where I left off 11 years ago. And for this, I will take you through history to know how Emiliano Zapata became an icon, 1,000 times interpreted, an ideal and a symbol many times used by the power of system in Mexico, and retaken and reclaimed also by the people, by indigenous groups, and by marginal groups. Let me show you some images of a recent exhibition of Zapata in the subway of Mexico City. I thank my friend, the psychologist Miriam Cepeda from Mexico City, who took these images of Zapata metro station from a recent exhibition that was presented, and she sent it to me. And although each of these images can lead us to an analysis, I will simply refer to 3 moments of the many angles of Zapata. Let me show you the pictures. These are some of the interpretations that artists made. Now, the mustache now. Therefore, I want to focus in 3 moments today. The first one, it will be Tierra y Libertad, Land and Freedom. The second one, it will be Zapata Vive, La Lucha Sigue. Zapata Lives, The Fight Continues. of the Zapatistas, and the third one, it will be 2019, Zapata Gay of Fabián Chaires. Therefore, let's go to the very first one, to the first moment. Tierra y Libertad. The Mexican Revolution was not monolithic. It was not a monolithic movement, but several nation projects and movements that drove it. It is not easy to understand the Mexican Revolution. There were many forces from many different directions. The Magonistas, it was the ideology, it was anarchism. The progressive entrepreneur like Francisco y Madero, or the politicians like Venustiano Carranza, or the generals of the revolution. This is Francisco Madero, who challenged the dictator, and he was running for no re-election, not dictatorship. And this is Venustiano Carranza, who was president between 1917 and 1920. He is the one who put in action the Constitution of 1917, that is the current Constitution of Mexico. But also, under his presidency, also happened the Zapata assassination. And here we have, perhaps the only thing that all these forces had in common, it was to end with the dictatorship of Porfirio Díaz. Porfirio Díaz represented the philosophical, ideological, and economical liberal movement that was consolidated after the death of Benito Juárez. Díaz's liberalism was a pragmatic political project that sought to bring Mexico to modernity and industrial development, but at the cost of exploitation of large social sectors. Not so different from the current neoliberalism. Díaz's liberalism put democracy as a facade and economic development over social justice, but only possible because of the political and economic dictatorship. Therefore, during the time of Díaz, many industries took place. It was true, he brought together many advances, but the benefit it was only for few ones. Although Díaz, who had been a hero of the Juarista years, his 40 years in power allowed him to establish and affirm an hacienda system or landlord system, an industrialization of Mexico in which railroads, telegraph, highways, banks, development of the oil industry, and factories of various kinds were established in Mexico. However, all this at a great social cost. Mexico progress was concentrated in the big cities and benefited only a few privileged sectors. By 1910, 2/3 of the population lived in rural areas and 1/3 in cities. Díaz's progress only reached some oligarch families in Mexico and families of landowners in the provinces, while the majority live in great poverty. Although Díaz is recognized for having brought arts, industry, technology, and the creation of the National University system, it is together to mention that it was possible due to the exploitation of 80% of the population. The graphic record of that time is due to the photographic collection of Agustín Víctor Casasola. As the writer Miguel Ángel Berumen points out, the 3.6 of the photographic archive that colonized the imagination of the nation belongs to Casasola. And I quote, "However, Casasola has been the name and the most influential dynasty in the collective perception of the Mexican Revolution, thanks in large part to the historical awareness of Agustín Víctor Casasola, who transmitted to his blood relatives and translated into a family vocation for the dissemination of the photographs through various editorial projects that both he and his son and daughter, Gustavo and Piedad, promoted. For this research, we focus on the facet of Agustin Victor that has more to do with his historical awareness than with his ability to take photographs. End of the quote. Perhaps the only thing that I will disagree with Berumen, it will be that I consider that Victor Casasola was a fantastic photographer of his time. And I used to think that I am a photographer too, to understand what he did during the revolution and creating also one of the very first news outlets in the continent. It was an admirable thing. Without Casasola, we will have an incomplete story of the Mexican Revolution. Villa and Zapata represented the rural peasants sectors, the most exploited and impoverished sectors of the country. By 1911, Diaz, due to all the forces that came together, left power. It took only 1 year for all these forces to end the dictatorship. However, the revolution ran for 12 more years. If the dictator was out after 1 year, why the revolution ran for another 12 years? That ended with the murdering and assassination of Doroteo Arango, or Pancho Villa, on July 20, 1923, in Parral, Chihuahua. Madero took power after Diaz left. However, and soon after, Zapata became disappointed. Madero, although it represented effective no-reelection suffrage, his transition was not a radical change. His political document, called Plan de San Luis, he preserved the powers and empowered the sectors of Diaz very much. And for this, Zapata was in completely disagreement with him, because he was expecting that when Madero will take power, he will make justice to the people, especially to those who were suffering on exploitation. In November 11, in the town of Ayala, in the state of Morelos, Zapata proclaimed the Plan de Ayala by the hand of the Methodist educator and pastor Otilio Montaño. The Plan de Ayala presented the political ideology that would leave deep marks to the century, not only in Mexico, but in many other revolutions. And although the text focuses on the overthrow of Madero, Ayala's plan can be summarized in 2 ideas: land and freedom, tierra y libertad, and the land belongs to those who work it. La tierra es de quien la trabaja. Both phrases became the axis of the agrarian reforms that never met the expectations and the approach that the revolution had from the 2 great caudillos, or the great champions, that this was an agrarian revolution. On 1913, by a couple, Victoriano Huerta took power and assassinated Francisco y Madero. Then the forces of Villa in the north and Zapata in the south, opposed to Huerta, who leaves the power and leaves to Spain. Huerta will die 2 years later in exile. This is a very important picture for Mexican history. This is Pancho Villa on the right side and Emiliano Zapata on the left side. And on this side, we have Otilio Montaño, the writer of the Plan de Ayala. John Reed, the great journalist, on the top right corner. You will see him with a sombrero. And this is Villa Zapata in National Palace. As many Mexicans, I grew up seeing this picture in many places. And many of us will wish that they will stay in power, that Villa will stay as a president with Zapata together. But both of them knew that they were not people that were looking to hold the power, but actually to open the path for justice to happen. Villa was a media man who displayed military intelligence, strength, and patriarchal and macho figure, tenderness and toughness. As Carlos Fuentes will say, Villa was between the angel, and the fierro, the iron. To mention his 2 closest collaborators, Felipe Ángeles, and Rodolfo Fierro, the first a human thinker and the second known for being a bloodthirsty man. Zapata, on the other hand, in the South, he was less mediatic than Villa, but his thought and philosophy invaded the South and reached the heart of the peasant, the farmers, the campesinos. Zapata and Villa became part of the popular culture of Mexico. The photograph taken by Agustin Casasola became an emblematic photo of both, of the southern leader, Emiliano Zapata, and the northern centauro, Pancho Villa. After Carranza took power in 1916, after many transitions and proclaiming the current Mexican Constitution of 1917, Zapata and Villa were vilified by the newspapers of the time, blamed as agitators and those who prevented peace in the country. The problem was that for Villa and Zapata, the new power was not responding to all of those who bleed for a regime change, for those who fought to overthrow Diaz first and then Huerta later. These are some of the newspapers of the time. In one, they say that General Pablo González and Colonel Jesus Guajardo planned the ambush and betrayal in Chinameca. They may believe Zapata that they were supporting him, and they ambushed him, and he was assassinated in 1919. But General Gomez and Colonel Guajardo were treated as heroes in those days. And Zapata was shown as someone who was not desirable. They call Emiliano Zapata, murió el zapatismo. Zapatismo is death. Thinking in the last century, and even currently until today, we will know that Zapatismo is very much alive. To kill Zapata didn't kill the Zapatismo. And this is the excelsior of that day. And they call Zapata sanguinario. It will be a bloodthirsty man. And I want to show the next picture. This is Zapata assassinated, and below is Che Guevara. It was very interesting, always called to me the attention of these two pictures, because it was the idea that to vilify revolutionaries, to present as villains, people who has been fighting for their rights and for ideals, it has to be vilified, showing their corpse, surrounded by those who killed them. And these two pictures, I see great parallelism. Tierra y Libertad, Land and Freedom, became the influence of various agrarian reforms in the 20th century. Here we have Ernesto Che Guevara with farmers in Cuba. And he proclaimed a very similar ideal like Zapata. Therefore, who revindicated the image of Zapata? Who was? Who is the one who brought Zapata today? When he passed away in 1919, he was a villain. And for the next 10 years, in 1923, Pancho Villa will be murdered. Who was? Well, I was in a conversation with my good friend and playwright, drama director, Silvia Ortega Betoretti, who specializes in writing about special people in history, and she told me that it was about because Diego Rivera. Diego Rivera, in his murals in 1930s, 1920s and 1930s, he will bring back the image of Zapata and start to explore and reivindicate the name of Zapata. Some of the murals, for example, this is the mural of the people of history in Mexico, in the National Palace in Mexico City, in El Zócalo. In the top of the mural, you can see Tierra y Libertad. And then here you have this mural in the Palace of Cortés in Cuernavaca. where Zapata is leading the peasants, and he's dressed as another farmer. And you have this image on the right coming from this mural, also in the Museum of Art on New York, the MoMA. Sorry, my Spanish and English is crossing. And there here you have another mural of Diego Rivera. One is called Blood Martyrs, and it's in the Escuela Nacional de Chapingo on the top. He's fertilizing the soil, the earth. Chapingo is the National School of Agronomy, and Diego Rivera will make many murals there. And he will use the figure of Zapata, reivindicating and putting himself attached to la tierra, to the earth. And on the right, we have in the Museo of Coahuanahuac in Cuernavaca as the caudillo, as the leader, as the general. Therefore, Diego Rivera, he will help to reivindicate the image of Zapata. And then let's go to the second moment, because I really want to have time for everybody to have a conversation. And in this second moment, I want to take you to the Zapatista movement, to the 1990s. This is me in the 1990s, when I was a journalist there and an ethnographer for the National School of Anthropology, and also professor at the National, at la Universidad Nacional, Autónoma de México, the National University of Mexico, UNAM. And for 7 years, I was doing ethnography in the Central Square of Mexico City. What a fantastic place, because the Central Square of Mexico City is this big plaza, this giant plaza where the Aztec Empire rise up and where the conquistador came. And today we have there the big plaza. And for 7 years I was doing ethnography, very much focusing between 1994 and 2001, very much focusing on the presence of the Zapatistas in the Zócalo. In this book, Antropología Simbólica, they published 4 of my ethnographies of those days. And in this other book, Cuicuilco, they published my final ethnography of the entrance of the Zapatistas to Mexico City. Therefore, in this second moment, I want to call it Zapata vive, la lucha sigue. Zapata lives, the fight continues. That was the chant of those days. There was not a rally, political rally there in the square without that chant. It doesn't matter if it was a Zapatista rally or not, always will be present, that chant. Therefore, during this section, I will show you some of the pictures that I took of those years, but not only of the pictures of the Zapatistas, but also pictures of Chiapas. Therefore, you can understand the context where the Zapatistas, the neo-Zapatistas of 1994 took place. It took 75 years since the assassination of Zapata and 71 years after the assassination of Villa for the Zapatistas uprising in 1994 that took place in the southern Mexican state of Chiapas. Although in history there were also very important Zapatista movements, such as Rubén Jaramillo, revolt in Morelos in the 1940s, the neo-Zapatistas made a tremendous impact at the end of the century and beginning of this. Just to let you know, you may remember the old-fashioned slides. Yeah, for those who remember. Well, I had to scan those in order to bring them today. January 1, 1994, I was a recent entry student at the National School of Anthropology and History, where a large group of indigenous people from the state of Chiapas took over the city of San Cristobal de las Casas in the early hours of January 1, 1994. Precisely at the same time that NAFTA came into force, the free trade agreement between Canada, United States, and Mexico. The group called itself the Zapatista Army of National Liberation, of Ejército Zapatista de Liberación Nacional. And these were some of the posters on the graphics of those days. It was very interesting how they were bringing together the images of Zapata, the star, the socialist star, the image of the Zapatista with the ski mask. And I was in the National School of Anthropology in Mexico, ENA, the most rebellious and revolutionary school in Mexico, the one that is capable of putting up its skin to defend social causes. I can say that I owe to the ENA my social and political ideology. It was in coexistence with the faculty and with my colleagues that opened my eyes to a Mexico in which I live, but did not understand. The deep Mexico, el México profundo, the diverse Mexico, the Mexico that hides the reality of the indigenous peoples to show the face of the modern, neoliberal, and first world Mexico. ENA opened my eyes and gave me the tools for critical thinking. I was reading the communications of Subcomandante Insurgente Marcos, that for the first time I came across the term neoliberalism. Many of the things written by Marcos, brilliant and agile pen, will be today's topic. He and the Zapatistas communities were already looking at about the effects on the earth, about the effects of global warming, about the effects of neoliberalism, about the exploitation, the overexploitation of the resources. Thus, a second manifestation of Zapatismo was given with a new iconography, faces covered by a ski mask, and from the diversity of the voices of the indigenous groups of Chiapas, who speak Celtal, Tzotzil, Mame, Tojolabal, among many other languages from the Maya people. And in those days, it was Carlos Salinas de Gortari, the president of Mexico, graduated from Harvard, who came the father of neoliberalism in Mexico. And in 1994, it was a count that 364 social leaders in the country were murdered. And this manifestation, a representation of all the caskets of the people who was murdered under his regime. I took that picture in 1994 in the Zócalo. The rebel group was identified as the Zapatistas, or ZLN. And its contribution to humanity and contemporary society is important. It has not been valued entirely, but I want to name a few things here, why we need to recognize the Zapatistas. First, the ZLN was able to understand and unreveal how neoliberalism will bring a more pronounced economic imbalance in the world that will unleash various crises, social, global migration, and exploitation of natural resources, and attracted a worldwide dialogue. It is at the initiative of the Zapatistas that there has been global dialogue against the exploitation of the forests, seas, lands, and natural resources. Their voices even challenge the right-wing sectors that dress up as environmentalists, since the indigenous communities for millennia have known how to exist with the Mother Earth. Because, as they will say, we are of the color of the earth. The Zapatistas started to attract to Mexico City many different groups that will come together. The ZLN challenged the conception of democracy understood from capitalism and designated the categories of free world and the Iron Curtain, as if only democracy belongs to capitalism. Also challenged the dogmatic forms of communism and socialism, represented today very much in Cuba and Venezuela, to show us a new way of understanding democratic socialism. Zapatistas will challenge both sides. And they exercise and will say that democracy comes from the community base or the base communities and not from the power and from the practice of social autonomy. Therefore, they are organized as communities and exercise autonomy. That is why they call themselves rebels and not revolutionaries, because the revolutionary seeks to take power. The rebel seeks to transform society and the world. That is why they call themselves La Dignidad Rebelde, the rebellious dignity. The subcomandante, or the subcommander Marcos, is subcommander because the comandantes or the comandantas or the commanders are the representatives of the indigenous autonomous communities. He is only a spokesperson for the cause. I want to say that Zapatismo educated me and challenged me to think years later about how to translate these concepts into what later will become CCATE, el Centro de Cultura, Arte, Trabajo y Educación, where I am director and founder. The cry of for everyone, everything. For us, nothing, of the Zapatistas. In CCATE, we will say all the knowledge of the world from everyone and to everyone. The chant of the Zapatistas, here the people rule and the government obeys. In CCATE, we translate it in a new way to think a non-profit where the social agenda is set by the community, not from the board of directors or from the director like myself or for the staff, but by the community. In CCATE, the agenda is set by the community. Where I learned that? With the Zapatistas. CCATE is an organization that follows the principles of Paulo Freire of dialogical education, the principles of Martin Luther King of creating a beloved community. However, follows a similar principle of governance as the Zapatismo, where each class, each circle is autonomous. Each class at CCATE decides their own curricula, their own goals, their own agenda. Just like the caracoles or the communities with the Zapatistas. The work that we do is collective, and we shout out, Viva la Comunidad, long live to the community. Thus, the Zapatismo has been embodied in the Center of Culture, Art, Training, and Education, CCATE, a model of social organization that comes from the immigrant social base, and that we hope to be faithful to our model always. See, the next contribution I consider it has to do that the STLN opened the eyes to gender diversity and also had to challenge itself in the patriarchy that governed in many left movements. The Zapatistas comandantas put on the table the womanist voice, the mujerista voice, the voice of diversity, the empowerment from themselves that even challenged their fellow male Zapatistas and counterparts. Commander Ramona, who I saw in the Zócalo when she was ill with cancer, was the most powerful voice of the Zapatistas, more powerful than Marcos. On that, any male commander from the front showing the oppression that the patriarchy has exercised in Mexico and that has relegated millions of women to a system of exploitation, murdering, and sexual abuse. A patriarchal system that even had neglected the opportunity to many generations of women to bring their talents and live full lives because has been under the boot of patriarchy. In 2001, when the Zapatista caravan took place and stayed at ENA, I had the fortune to be there, both in the Zócalo and in the National School of Anthropology, and see how under Fox's president pressure, he wanted to speak with Marcos, as it was a dialogue between two male caudillos. The Zapatistas did not send Marcos to the Congress, but Comandanta Esther, who was the living spoken person of the indigenous and Zapatista women and communities. Her voice in the Mexican Congress, it was the first time that a woman indigenous person spoke at the Congress of Mexico. It was the voice of a woman, an indigenous woman, showing the reality of Mexico. And I want to show you some of the pictures of the Caravana Zapatista of 2001. Then you can imagine how this rally happened all the way from Chiapas and followed the route of Zapata until they came inside the Zócalo of Mexico City. And I had the opportunity in 2004 by the Human Rights Commission of Mexico. I was invited with the historian Carlos Mondragón to visit Zapatista territories and non-Zapatista territories, to stay with families, to take stories, and to listen about human rights. This was Actial, Chiapas in 1997. You may remember that there was the big massacre in Actial. And I was there visiting many of the widows and many of the victims of that massacre. The coffee has feet. This is a picture that always struck me to remember what happened in the coffee plantations. I was witness how people has to carry up to 40 kilos in the bags for 3 miles down the hill, where intermediaries for Starbucks, Nestle, and many other international companies will pay 75 cents the kilo. 75 cents the kilo of coffee. And at the cost of the bags, at the cost of the children that has to pick and then the exploitation of coffee happening. That's why every time when I can find the Zapatista coffee, I get it. I love coffee, as many of you, I am sure. But just to remember this, that the coffee has feet, that the banana has feet and hands, and that every fruit that we have here in the United States, it has been planted by other hands, or by many other hands. This was Don Manuel. He was my guide in those days. Children in the coffee plantations. After school, they had to go there to pick a lot of, it's interesting because people think that socialism is not related with mysticism or religion, as the old idea of dogmatics in communism thought that it was atheist. No, what I found is that Zapatistas communities are deep spiritual communities, very deep spiritual communities. I call it this one the Last Supper. And this is a picture. You might recognize the gentleman that is there. And I am there with Cristina Arango, and it was a picture taken by Haruko Arango in front of the Consulate of Mexico. Don't tell them. And let's go to the tear moment. We are fine. We're still in good time. And the tear moment is with Fabián Chairés. I was in Mexico City in 2019, and I was invited by the National School, the graduate unit of the National Autonomous University of Mexico, for the doctoral students to teach qualitative research, participatory action research. And I hear about Fabián Chairés' painting that I want to show you. Zapata Gay by Fabián Chairés, a Mexican painter. Therefore, this painting was presented in the Palace of Bellas Artes in Mexico City, a few blocks from the Central Square, from Zócalo. And the National Palace of Bellas Artes, or the Palace of Bellas Artes, is the most important place for the arts in Mexico. And when I hear about this painting being presented there, and with Fabián Chairés present, I said, I had to go. I had to go. I was very, very, very happy to hear about this, very glad to hear about this event. And there was a lot of protest against Chairés' painting. The Cry of Zapata Lives came to my memoir in 2019. The painting is called The Revolution, but also is known as Zapata Gay. The protest of those who appeal to the nationalism, like if the patriarchal image of Zapata cannot be touched or should be untouchable. Including the Zapata descendants, they were against this picture, this painting. They protested against Fabián Chairez. But the protest was not against history. Since Zapata, sexual orientation has been the subject of decades, but against an open representation that challenges the stereotype of the caudillo or the hero of the revolution. They believe that that image should align to the macho image, to the Mexican macho image, the brave person, the brave caudillo. There is historical evidence indicates that there is the possibility of Zapata having had relations with Ignacio de la Torre y Mier, who was the son-in-law of the dictator Porfirio Díaz. That day I was, I jumped there, let me see. I did something here. Yeah, that day I was teaching, and I was with my good friend, Caitlin Brady, who is also a photographer. And as soon as we finished the course, we took the subway because the next day we will leave the city. And I wanted to reach the open gallery. And as well, I wanted to see the demonstrations. But Mexico City is not easy to navigate, and even less on Friday, you can imagine. Those who know the city know that to get to the Palace of Fine Arts, you must first cross the Alameda Central Park, which is a beautiful park from the colonial times. We did not arrive in time to see the painting. When about 100 meters from arriving and near the central fountain, members of the LGBTQ plus community found us head on. And if them, I will use them as a pronoun, come out of Chairez painting, them saw me. And in that moment I saw that the reality cannot be contained. Even if they closed the museum, even if there was 1,000 people protesting about the painting, it was like the painting coming out, being alive. And I think the picture moved because I want to show you. Therefore, it was coming out. And for a moment, I was completely paralyzed, seeing, because it was like the painting coming out. And I asked them, can I take you a picture? Since I had with me the Nikon 35 millimeters with film, I don't use digital, I use film, I had to set the tripod. And I asked for time. And them was very gentle and say to me, take your time to take the light, to be sure about the light. And we started to talk while I was setting, and told me that nonetheless, people was protesting. It cannot be contained. That Zapata is for everyone. That Zapata cried for everyone, not only for few Mexicans, not only for those who embody the patriarchism, not only for those who has been used him for the government symbol, sometimes in power when it is convenient, but for everyone. And with this picture, I want just to say, Zapata vive, la lucha sigue. Zapata is very much alive, and the Zapatismo continues. And I want to take some questions if you want. Thank you so much. Muchas gracias.